This is The Payoff with me, Sylvia Jeffreys, thanks to Belong Internet and UniSuper. Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, thank you so much for joining us on
Pleasure.
The Payoff.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thank you.
Look, we really do appreciate you carving out some time for us because, as you're aware, young voters are going to have more power than ever at this upcoming federal election. So I think it's really important for them to hear directly from the man who wants to be Prime Minister. And there's a lot of ground that we can cover today. There are obviously a lot of issues in play at this election. But what I want to do today is focus as much as I can on the issues which I think are most important to those Gen Z and millennial voters. So first up, my first question is, what is the first change you will make? What's the first policy you'll implement, if elected as PM, that will have an immediate effect on the lives of young Australians?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, firstly, inflation's a big issue at the moment in the economy, and it's a boring topic to talk about, but people feel the impact of it through higher grocery prices and higher costs for food, electricity, gas. So the energy system we have to get right because at the moment that's making everything more expensive. The cold storage of food, the transport of food, and that's, I think, a really important first priority for government. We also need to do a lot more around housing, and I just think it's a tragedy that many young Australians have lost the dream or the aspiration of home ownership because they just think it's too far beyond their reach, and unless you've got a mum or dad with some cash, it's impossible to see how you can get into a house. So I think they're two of the priorities, but creating a stronger economy so that people have got stability in their jobs. When I left school, 100 years ago, it was an uncertain job market and people were jumping for the first job they got. Now, it's different today, but that can turn pretty quickly if the economy sours, as we've seen in other parts of the world. And so making sure that the good decisions are being made about how to manage the economy and put incentive in place, getting the tax settings right, and that's then conducive to economic growth so that people can do well in small businesses or do well in their workplace as an employee.
Okay, so let's drill down on a few of those issues then, because they're definitely a lot of the issues that are at the heart of what young voters will be thinking about when they cast their vote, whenever this election happens to fall. First of all, house prices and housing affordability. A lot's been made online, and I'm sure you've seen it, about your first home purchase. You were, 19 years old, is that right?
19, 20, yeah.
And a 2-bedroom unit in Yeronga, a great suburb in Brizzy. How did it make you feel to make that purchase, arguably the most important purchase of your life?
Well, it was really anxious, and it really upsets me that a 20-year-old who had worked hard through their early teen years as I did couldn't possibly afford that house today. It was an old sort of Queenslander that I ended up painting and renovating a bit, and then on sold it eventually. I should have been smart enough to keep it. It'd be worth a lot of money today, but it's difficult for people to conceptualise how they can get a deposit together, pay for the legals, pay for the other expenses that go into purchasing that house. And so we have to create an environment again where people can put all of that together and make a situation where it does stack up, because it's, for me, housing has been an important investment in my life because it's allowed me to work hard to put money into housing, and then I sort of joke and say, well, why didn't I sort of keep everything you ever owned? But the reality is you had to sell one to purchase the next, and that's normally the case for most people, using just recycling that money. But there's, there are all sorts of things that we can put in place, and we'll have a couple of announcements during the campaign. So I'm sort of a bit hamstrung at the moment as to.
You don't want to reveal them here and now?
I won't. I'd like to reveal them exclusively, but we're not just quite there yet.
You can always come back another time.
I can come back and give you the tip. But it's an anxious period, and you're worried about every other item of expense in your budget as well, because you're trying to trim back everywhere else, and it means you can't go on a holiday. It means that you can't buy that car that you wanted to. It means that you're not eating out, and they're tough sacrifices to make for a 19 or 20 or 25-year-old.
So there is a lot online around recently your entire property portfolio. It's been making headlines, obviously, in recent days and weeks. Something like $18 million sold over 35 years of property, a total of over $30 million in transactions, which seems like a lot, of course. It's a lot of money over the course of someone's life. When you look at that in the sum of it all, are you proud of what you've achieved?
I am proud of what I've achieved because I've worked hard for it. So when I finished year 12, mum and dad separated, and I was the eldest of 5 kids, and that really hit me hard. But dad essentially left that relationship with very little money, and he was happy for mum to have the house and raise the kids, but he didn't have really any money out of that separation. We grew up in a house where there wasn't much money, but we had instilled in us a very strong work ethic from a young age. So Dad and I essentially went into, he was a builder, and we essentially went into business together. So I was working, double shifts or a lot of overtime as a police officer. He was building the houses, and so half of that list is actually sort of the small business that we had, houses that I never lived in, never rented out, that we paid tax on. We paid stamp duty, paid capital gains tax, paid personal income tax. So when you look at what the final net figure would be, it's much less, obviously, and particularly in those days, it was less. And so we would buy a block of land in a new housing estate and build a 3 or 4 bedroom brick and tile house. It wasn't sort of an elaborate offering, and that was our business. That was our small business, and I'm proud of that. I mean, I remember as a young kid going on to building sites where Dad had been renovating or building a house and cleaning up and stacking it all up, and before the days of skip bins and going to the dump and all that sort of stuff. So no, I'm proud of the fact that we worked hard, and I've tried to instill in my own children a really strong work ethic, and I think it's a good life discipline. Now, you've got to have a mixture of luck in there as well, and sometimes we had good luck and sometimes bad on different deals. But I think you've got to give it a go, and the reason I think that housing is so important is because it's an anchor asset. If you want to go into small business, if you want to start something in your garage or in a back bedroom, an online business, a cleaning business, whatever it is, generally the bank will want that asset, that house as the asset to borrow against to fund your small business. So I think it gives people that opportunity and that option. That's not for everyone, but people should have the option. It allows stability in relationships. If you've got a house where you have a familiar setting and you can raise kids there, if that's a decision that you make. It's also an asset that grows in value that hopefully by your retirement you've paid off, so that you've got stability, you can travel or you can have choices. You then can bequeath that asset, you can leave that asset to your kids and grandkids and set them up for life. So that's why I think housing is such an important discussion for us to have. And as I say, I really feel very passionate about making home ownership a reality again.
Well, because for a lot of young adults, it's now gone from being a dream to a fantasy that
or
they
a nightmare.
assume, or a nightmare, something they cannot attain. And there are a lot of people out there who will not begrudge you for doing well, right? That's what this podcast is all about. It's about getting ahead, obviously within the rules and with what's in place in the current economic environment. And I think a lot of people out there want a Prime Minister who knows how to get ahead and who is good with money, because you will be in control of the nation's purse strings if you win the election, of course. I suppose what you're facing here, though, is a perception issue among young voters who might view you as out of touch with the issues that they face in terms of entering the property market. So what would you say to a young voter about how you're going to make it easier for them to buy their first house?
Well, the first point I'd make is that I was exactly in their position. My family didn't have the money to underwrite my property purchase, and I worked hard, and now we have to provide more support because it's impossible for a young person just on an average wage and having saved up money as a teenager working after school, etc., to get that deposit. And we also have to look at the supply side. There's a lot of talk around the immigration program, and we've said that we should bring the immigration program back for a couple of years until housing can catch up, because we've got people lined up 30 deep to find a rental property or can't bid at an auction successfully. And look, I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of assistance, and there's a supply and demand side here. If we've got a population the size of Adelaide coming in over 5 years, which is what the government's doing at the moment, then those people want to live in a house, they want a roof over their heads like anyone else, and they're competing against Australians for that limited stock. So we have to increase the supply, and what we've announced is a $5 billion plan to work with councils to help them pay for sewerage and water, road upgrades, to bring the next housing stage of that development to market. And so we think that creates 500,000 new homes, and it will free up some of the demand that's there at the moment. And I just think we've also announced a ban on foreign buyers competing against Australians for those houses, at least for a couple of years, and let's see whether or not we can recalibrate the market so that we're not having an undersupply and an over demand.
So your target of 500,000 is obviously a lot less than the Albanese government's promise of 1.2 million. Why have you set a lower target?
Well, just in this program, we're saying out of that program alone, we think there are 500,000 homes. The government hasn't offered that program, so anything we're doing is in addition to the current settings and what's in place at the moment. I think it's also important to point out that the government really hasn't built any homes or funded any homes yet. Some are under construction, fair enough, but a lot of that is not going to be relevant to first home buyers. Our program is directly targeted at first home buyers, and that is an additional 500,000 to what the government's projecting, and we think that will make a big difference.
So the other policy you floated for first home buyers is allowing them to draw $50,000 out of their superannuation to put towards a house deposit. So how is that going to work, and who will be eligible for that?
So Sylvia, first point is that super is incredibly important, and when you're 20 or 25 or 30 or 35, it sort of just seems way too far off and you're not worried about it. But it is an asset that benefits from compounding, so it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And the idea is that you've got adequacy in retirement to support you, so hopefully you don't have to draw a pension, or perhaps you only have to draw a part pension. Maybe you've got other incomes and you've had shares or a rental property or something like that that might help you enjoy a decent retirement to reward you for the work that you've undertaken over your lifetime. So I don't support a policy where you pull money out of superannuation without an obligation for it to go back in when we're talking about housing deposits. So I think it would be a bad policy if you were just allowed to pull the money out and not repatriate, not remit that money back. And if you, let me put it this way, if you had bought with your super a house 10 years ago, if you'd accessed your super and that helped you get the deposit to buy the house, when you sold the house today or in 10 years' time, the property price has probably doubled, and you've then increased the amount that you have earned, not just for yourself but for your super fund. And so our policy requires you to put that money with the uplift, with the increase in the value, back into your super fund. It gets you into the housing market, so you've got an asset outside of superannuation, which is increasing in value every year. And secondly, it's probably provided a better return than what some of, at least money in the bank, would have in your superannuation fund. So we have to get that balance right. Super is incredibly important, and I don't seek to undermine the benefit of super or the importance of it, but I really think that getting people into property as soon as possible is good for their financial future. So
how long would they have to put that money back into their superannuation?
Well, there's no. It's when the house is disposed of. So when it's sold, so that might be in 20 or 30 years. But the point is that the long run gain on that house will be quite significant, as we've seen with property, with residential property over a long period of time in Australia.
So some people may never put it back in if they hold on to that house or that property for the duration of their lives.
That's right, and they would end up with a house that would be worth. If they're buying it for $1 million today, it might be worth $5 million by the time they retire. Yeah. But had they not been able to get into that house, they wouldn't have been able to see that capital gain over their lifetime or over a longer period of time.
I'm interested in this one also because of what we saw happen when people were allowed to draw from their super during the pandemic as well. And it was spent on a lot of non-essential purchases at that time. So will young people need to prove that it's going onto a house deposit?
Yeah, absolutely, and there'll be penalty provisions if it's inappropriately used. But in the end, it's people's money. I mean, you don't see it because it comes out of your pay packet and goes into your super account. It's not like you pay, which hits your account, and then you can either put some into a savings account or blow it at the pub on a Friday night. It's your money, so why would you spend it unwisely? And it's about your retirement. And I think for every young person who's trying to pull together every dollar, every cent for a deposit, why would they misappropriate that money? Why would they spend it unwisely? They know it's their golden ticket to getting into a house, and in many cases getting out of home, which probably makes them happy and their parents happy as well.
No doubt. It's a really delicate and difficult tightrope that you have to walk with property, because you want to make houses more affordable for young people while also not taking out the value of the properties that are already owned by thousands and thousands of Australians who don't want to lose the value of their asset. I mean, how do you strike that balance? And would you be comfortable to see property prices go backwards?
I definitely don't want to see property prices go backwards. If you're a first home buyer that's about to buy a house, settle on a house today, you don't want to be in a position where you're sitting on negative equity or you owe more than what the house is worth within, in the next 5 years. Psychologically, that's draining. And that happened before in the 80s and 90s, where people were selling their houses, they were making a loss and going backwards. And there'll be some people in the market at the moment who have overpaid for a house or a unit, and they've got excited at an auction, or they've seen the price of it come back. And there are some pockets, not generally speaking, but some pockets where that has happened already, including and probably particularly in Sydney and parts of Melbourne as well. So no, I mean, you want there to be steady increase in the uplift, a steady increase in the value of that home. If you get dramatic spikes, then you'll see bubbles created and you'll see property prices come off. In the United States, where they have non-recourse loans, where people can just hand the keys back, that's a different situation than here. The bank won't let you off the hook if you've signed a loan document, and they're not going to allow you to walk away without being able to pay that loan off. So people take home ownership very seriously in our country, and it's been the creator of wealth for many Australians who have started with nothing and have worked hard to accumulate their properties, and that's what I want for younger Australians as they climb the property ladder.
I guess it's just you look at the way that property prices have far outstripped wage growth. I mean, the average house now can be up to 15, 16 times the average wage, depending on which city you live in. And that's just beyond grasp for so many young adults. Do you worry that, adults the age of your children, if they don't have the help of mum or dad, the bank of mum or dad, that they'll just never own a property in their own name?
Well, I look at my daughter, who works in childcare and saves like crazy, but she won't be in a position for a long time to be able to get into the market. Now, she's looking further out. She'd love to live in the city where she goes out with her friends on the weekend and be able to, go back to her unit afterwards. But she realises that's not realistic for her at the moment. And, she doesn't want to have to catch the train to work, or she wants to be able to drive. And so she doesn't want to go too far out of the city. But that's probably going to be the reality for her in terms of the price point that she's got. And she's set herself a savings plan and has spoken to a financial advisor, which I think is really important advice, and sometimes it can cost a bit of money. But I really think it's important to have somebody who can provide you financial advice who's independent, and also to have a good solicitor and a good accountant who you can fall back to. I really think they're fundamentals in any savings plan, whether you're saving for shares or for other investments or for a home. It's really foundational advice that people should take. And yeah, so I mean, Rebecca's talking about, well, what sort of furniture can I take from home and sort of set up to start with instead of getting a furniture package, etc. So yeah, all of those considerations are part of of the decision, and it's tough. There's no doubt about it, and that's why I say the supply side is important, because otherwise, if you don't have enough houses, you are going to see prices continue to increase dramatically. Where, as I say, we want prices to increase, but sustainably, and so matching that supply with demand is important, so that prices don't continue to get away from people and it becomes 17 or 18 times. And that just means that people give up altogether.
Sick of paying megabucks for your internet? Switching could help you. So switch to Belong Internet. They're backed by Telstra, they have a reliable network, and with internet plans with prices that aren't too spicy. Plus, you can change plans once a month and you're not locked in. For zippy internet at nifty prices, search Belong Internet. It feels good to belong. Okay, let's talk about the cost of living, because that's something that every single Australian is feeling right now. So you vowed to apply downward pressure to inflation, to the cost of living, to what we're paying for a loaf of bread at the supermarket right now. What does that look like? How do you intend to do that?
Well, I'll just give a basic example. I was at a farm in Melbourne recently. They produce a number of items, but including strawberries. So the glass manufacturer had put up the price of the glass jars that you're buying your strawberry jam in, because there's heat and energy that's involved in that. Their power bills have gone up dramatically. The farmer was talking about the fertiliser, which is energy intensive, and we're paying probably one of the highest electricity costs in the world. So the price of fertiliser had gone up. The price of wages had gone up. The price of cold storage had gone up dramatically, because they need to store their produce before it gets to market. So when you go into the supermarket, into an IGA, and you're thinking, hang on, how come, the price of jam or the price of cereal or whatever has gone up by 10 or 20 or 30%? Well, it's because at each point in that manufacturing process, in the production process, they're all passing on their additional costs. It's not just the electricity bill that you pay at home. It's the farmer and it's the IGA store owner. We were at a store yesterday where it was a big butcher shop, but it had fruit and veg and groceries as well. The owner there was saying, in that business where he employs 60 staff, so a medium-sized business, but not a huge. It wasn't a Coles or anything like that, or even an IGA. He was saying that his electricity bill has gone up by $40,000 a month, so $480,000 over the year, and he could absorb some of that, but a lot of that's going to be passed on in the cost that you're paying for meat or for eggs or whatever it is.
Why we pay $7 for a coffee, right?
Exactly. And so the point that I'm making is that the energy policy is so critically important in Tennessee in the United States or in Ontario in Canada, comparable societies to ours. They're paying a third the electricity cost that we are here. And so that's why I think we need to get the energy mix right. And I think at the moment, the government's policy of just having 100% renewables is driving up the cost of electricity. Whereas if you look at these other jurisdictions, they've got a balance in their system, which is what we're proposing. We need a lot more gas in the system, and I think even the Prime Minister acknowledges that now. Victoria's about to start importing gas, which is going to see a price increase again for businesses and for households. And I think we've got to do everything we can to take that inflation, that energy inflation that's putting up prices, to take that out of the system as quickly as we can.
You're obviously a big supporter of nuclear, and that's one of your signature policies. That's a big long-term plan, though, that you're talking about there. So do you have the power to bring down our electricity bills in one term if you're Prime Minister?
I think what you can do is look where there are problems at the moment that are causing price spikes. So when we had our policy independently assessed, we used an economist that is employed by the Labor government in South Australia and by the federal government. His advice to us was that our plan was 44% cheaper than Labor's renewables only plan that the Prime Minister is spruiking at the moment. So that's the first point that I'd make. The second point is that we are paying more today for overbuilding the renewables that are in the system. Renewables are incredibly important. Solar and wind. We put a lot of money into green hydrogen, which we thought would be more prospective than it's turned out to be. I'd love to believe that the batteries last for more than 3 or 4 hours, but they just don't at the moment. And so all of that overbuilding that's going on in the system at the moment, because not only do you need to provide the energy for the grid now, you need to charge the batteries for tonight. And we're paying that in our bills now. And our argument with nuclear is that it's got an 80-year lifespan. It's used by 19 of the top 20 countries at the moment, top 20 economies at the moment, and Australia's the only one where it's not. And I think in that scenario, let's look at the international experience where they've been able to bring down prices because you can spread the cost over that 80-year period. You can keep the lights on and you can allow the farmer to expand instead of contracting his or her business. And I just don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. We can look at the technology. And in latest polling, 18 to 34-year-olds, there are 2 out of 3, so 65%, of 18 to 34-year-olds who support nuclear because they know it's zero emissions. In the United Kingdom and the United States, both the Labor Party and the equivalent of the Labor Party and the Liberal Party strongly support nuclear. In fact, the British Labor Prime Minister has just announced that they're going to dramatically increase their investment in nuclear. And in China at the moment, they're building 29 nuclear reactors right now because they know that that's the cheapest way of delivering electricity to consumers.
I think a lot of young Australians are really passionate about knowing that their leaders are looking to the future and not just trying to get through, the next 2 years to the next election, the next 3 years to the next election. But to be clear, are you saying that you can make the average household electricity bill cheaper in one term of government?
Well, one of the things the Prime Minister did before the last election was promise to reduce power prices by $275, and they've gone up by $1,000. So I'm not going to make false promises. What I do know is that the international experience works. What I do know is that our independent economist who has costed our policy never accepted any money from us for doing that work independently, shows that our system is 44% cheaper. And I do know that we need more gas in the system so that we can provide the peaking as coal comes out of the system, and that economists predict that can put downward pressure on prices. So I will do everything I can, not just in the short term, but as you say, in the long term, to try and bring down prices, because energy is the economy. Everything you touch, every car you hop into, every mobile phone you pick up, it's had energy in its production or its day-to-day usage, and we can't pretend otherwise. The lights in the studio don't work. The ICU ward at the local children's hospital that must operate 24/7, or the freezer at the local IGA store has to operate 24/7, and that's why I think it's important to get those settings right.
Okay, moving on to something different. I know that you are a man who can have a laugh at himself, and you have pretty thick skin, and you've copped a lot of nicknames over the years, one of the most recent being Timu Trump. I'm interested to get your take on that, on being described as a cut-price Donald Trump. And do you see any similarities between yourself and Donald Trump?
Well, I think my hairdo, if I allowed it to sort of grow out, I think I could do the Trump hairdo. I suspect it's a pretty big, sort of flick over. But I remember years ago, and I remind my sons of this, who give me crap about having no hair, that at their age I had more hair than they do now. But secondly, that I thought I'm better off just to either go grow gracefully or let the hair fall out, accept your genes, and deal with it gracefully. And that's the way that I've approached it. So so maybe Timu in that regard. Look, I read two things. One is that I'm, nothing like Trump, or I should be more like Trump, or that I'm a cut price version of Trump. I'm my own person. The biggest influence in my political life has been John Howard and Peter Costello, and I worked as Peter Costello's assistant treasurer. I understand what it is to put a budget together. I understand what it means to make the decisions to keep our country safe, and that has been the biggest influence. I think I can have a strong and productive relationship with the United States President if I'm Prime Minister, with the UK Prime Minister, and with other world leaders. And I've got a good relationship with the Prime Minister from India, Prime Minister Modi, and others, Prime Minister Luxon in New South Wales, in New Zealand. So there's a lot of opportunity, but I think you need to bring strength to the table. I think you need to be a strong leader to stand up for our interests. And I think part of the problem the Prime Minister has at the moment is that he's just not. I just think he's out of his depth, and I think that's part of the reason why people are looking so seriously at changing their vote at the next election.
Well, that is what we saw in America. They flicked back to Trump again after the Biden administration. Speaking to a lot of young women leading into this conversation today, I did get a sense that there is concern among some young women, I can't speak for all obviously, about what a conservative government looks like for them here in Australia when they look to see what is happening over in America with the erosion of some of their rights. Can you sit here and promise a young Australian woman today that you won't claw back any of her rights?
Yes, I can. And I think, again, you should look at what politicians do as much or probably more than what they say. I was very heavily influenced as a young police officer, very naively sort of growing up in the world up until that point. And one of the things that I'm most passionate about is bringing an end to domestic violence, making sure that we can provide support to young girls and boys online. And as Home Affairs Minister, I invested in the creation of the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. We've literally saved the lives of hundreds of children who were in the hands of pedophiles or young women who are being trafficked through sex networks. And I think I've demonstrated over my lifetime that I take the protection of women and children particularly seriously, and I think it would be one of the most important tasks that I would apply myself to as Prime Minister. But similarly in relation to reproductive rights, in relation to property rights, I don't seek to make any changes, and I mean, to be fair, abortion's an issue for the states, and that's why you've seen different state governments have different approaches. But I don't support any change to the current law, and I've been very clear about that and very honest about it.
Look, to be clear with our audience and to put it on the record, you have matched the Albanese government's pledge in terms of women's health, which covers more funding for endometriosis, menopause, also contraceptive pills and things like IUDs, all those sorts of things. Something that struck me in recent weeks, though, is Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price's discussion, your colleague, around diversity, equality, inclusion. Now, we've seen, obviously, an enormous rollback of that in America. She's now signalling that some of those roles may be under threat here in Australia. What's your plan with that? Are you planning to cut DEI roles here in Australia?
Well, we've said I've appointed Jacinta to that role as the efficiency minister, effectively, to try and identify where there's waste in government. Now, that can take place in many departments. The government spends a lot of money each year. The reason I've done that is because I believe that most families at the moment are trimming every dollar of discretionary spend out of their budgets. People are just struggling to get by. Many families aren't coping. And I just think they would demand of their government that if there's waste, it should be cleaned up. And people are working a second and third job to pay their mortgage or pay their grocery bill at the moment. Why would they expect the government to be outspending large? So we have to concentrate on how we can most efficiently spend taxpayers' money. So in terms of government departments, the focus should be on frontline delivery, and we've guaranteed those frontline delivery positions. So that's where the focus is, and making sure that we're spending money efficiently. I have never discriminated against anybody on the basis of gender, on the basis of religion, skin colour, and I don't tolerate, and I wouldn't tolerate it in the public service. And I think people deserve support in their roles. I think diversification is great, but I think there is a lot of money that's spent in the government at the moment on non-productive positions, a lot of people going to conferences, a lot of people issuing papers and the rest of it. And I actually want to spend money on those nurses who are providing those supports to cancer patients or to a woman who's just been diagnosed with endometriosis. I want to make sure that we're spending money not on the back office causes and on the issues which are less productive than ways in which we can provide support to families to get them through a difficult time. So that's the approach I'd take.
DEI roles make up such a tiny portion, though, of the public service. It's like less than 1% of the main departments. So why single that out as an area to trim the fat?
Well, because if you're asking for $10 million for a mental health program or $100 million for a mental health program, I think you are looking for the millions of dollars or the tens of millions of dollars. And public servants are paid very well and they have a secure job. The government's put on an additional 36,000 public servants in Canberra over the course of the last couple of years, which is the 3 times the growth that we saw when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister. So my argument is that we should be providing support to doctors and nurses and to police officers and to teachers and others on the front line. There's a huge demand for spending not just in the health space but in infrastructure. If we want to help young people with housing and grants and fund the supply of housing, the government's got a finite budget like every family, and we have to make sure that that money's spent efficiently.
Well, you've been very generous with your time today, and we do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Before I let you go, though, I'm just interested to know, because it is a really tough job that you're putting your hand up for here in a really unique time in Australia's history. You make enormous sacrifices to be Prime Minister. Your family makes enormous sacrifices for you to be Prime Minister as well. Why do you want the job?
I want the job because I believe sincerely that we live in the best country in the world, and I think it's worth defending. And I think we live in an uncertain time, and I think my experiences that I bring from my business background, from my policing background, as Health Minister, as Assistant Treasurer, as the Defence Minister, as Immigration Minister, I think all of that makes for a good opportunity for me to apply those skills to make the decisions around managing the economy and helping people, not hurting them. And I think we live in a very uncertain age, and I think we need stability in the top job. I don't think we have that at the moment, despite the Prime Minister's best efforts. I just don't think he's strong enough, and I don't think he's up to the job. I have a very definite vision about how we can transform our economy and create those opportunities again for young people and keep us safe at the same time. And there are many other things that I would want to do as well. So I think all of that's worth the sacrifice. As Home Affairs Minister, I cancelled the visas of bikies and others who had been involved in the distribution of drugs and people who had committed sexual offences against children. And I've ended up with full-time security in my family as a result of that. But that was worth every moment, because I know that there are women and girls who haven't fallen victim to those same people who would have gone on to repeat offend as a result of the decisions that I made. So there are many great parts to this job. The downside is that your family gets dragged into the public spotlight when they haven't sought that spotlight or they're not a public figure. But we do live in a great country. It's worth fighting for, and I'm very passionate about that. And I'm a very patriotic person, and I want to make sure that my kids and grandkids and successive generations can enjoy the wonderful country that we've grown up in.
Well, Peter Dutton, we really appreciate you finding the time to speak to our audience today. Thank you so much.
Sylvia, it's a pleasure. Thank you.